Hey, hi, and hello. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to my channel. My name is Not Ziska, and I'm here today to share with you my 3.16 Scourge League start build guide for my Toxic Rain Ballista Totem Occultist. This is my first build guide, but I think it's a pretty good one. I'm excited to share it with you, so I want to jump right into it. What is this build? I'll break it down into three categories: archetype, ascendancy, and damage skill. This is a Ballista Totem focused Toxic Rain build, utilizing the Occultist Ascendancy for its strong chaos damage scaling, flexibility both in its skill tree and through additional curses, and being able to bypass hexproof, while still providing damage reduction and chaos resistance. And of course, we want Profane Bloom to bring our mapping capabilities to the highest levels. We chose to focus on Ballista Totems to take advantage of the additional mobility offered to builds that automate their damage. Rather than sit back and let totems slowly do the work, we take on an aggressive playstyle, running an additional 6 link while maintaining at least 2 curses, maximizing wither stacks and refreshing totems as needed. Of course, Toxic Rain is an obvious choice for a league start. While the more obscure Scourge Arrow Ballista Occultist or Poison Sparkers are very interesting, they don't hold a candle to the out-of-the-box capabilities of a well-balanced Toxic Rain character. And that brings us to the next topic. What is the purpose of this build? As I stated, our goal is to build a well-balanced character, starting with a solid core that brings brutal damage through Toxic Rain's many scalers. Rounded defenses with strong crowd control utilizing hinders, a strong life pool foundation, high armor, and we even found a use for all of that dexterity you'll be needing for the build by turning it into spell suppression. From there, we onboarded as much quality of life as we could into the build, with the starter version having fully automated mana management and no mana flask required, respectable life regen, comfortable movement speed, phasing, tons of flexibility, and a ridiculous buff uptime due to the skill effect duration that we stack. And remember all of that dexterity that you have laying around just wasting away? We're going to put it to even more use as we further invest into high dexterity items for additional life, damage, and spell suppression, which will grant us immunity to shock, freeze, burning ground, shocking ground, and by far most importantly, that annoying chilling ground. That also leaves us with enough affix room on our flasks for attack and move speed. Will it work in 3.16? Well, I'd certainly like to think so. We can never know for sure. We don't know exactly what the Scourge mechanic has in store for us, but we do know how well this character performed in 3.15 and exactly how the changes impact it. In fact, if you were determined an elf, you could just about replicate the exact stats we have on our starter build in 3.15, although for a much higher budget and with a much worse defense formula. We are able to hit over double the damage of our 3.15 test character and 6 to 7 times the damage of our Toxic Rain Ballista Pathfinder from Anomaly. But all of that damage is nothing compared to the defensive scaling we are able to bring online very early by running 4 auras for what amounts to only an 8-point skill tree investment. This is a complete turnaround from 3.15 versions of the build, which struggle to survive without further investment into timeless and cluster jewels or ward stacking. What is this character capable of doing? Well, a little bit of everything. It's great for progressing the Atlas at any pace. It's really about how you want to build it and how you want to play it. We can kill most encounters, including invitations, on a complete bare-bone budget, allowing streamlined access into the endgame Atlas passives while still maintaining a setup that has very high tier clear capabilities. For comparison, I will list the key points of the 3.16 version of the build with the 3.15 test character stats. We'll start with life, of which we have a pool of 5,000 that will continue to scale as this character grows. We have 25,000 armor, flasked, and 15,000 unflasked. We have an impressive 7 million tooltip PoE Cyrus DPS. And what that means is that is our potential max possible DPS with the setup that we have in PoE right now. It does not mean that you're going to be doing 7 million damage all of the time. Bosses move around. Toxic Rain can also be inconsistent, though we do help counter that by achieving our highest damage area of effect breakpoint with Toxic Rain, and we'll get into that a little bit later. We have 75% chaos resistance, 30% spell suppression, which is a good start on our road to being fully spell suppressed, We have sustained mana, as I mentioned before, no cluster jewels used, and it's on an extreme budget. Now our 3.15 test character had 3 to 3.5 million PoE DPS, depending on how much you wanted to fluff it out. We had 4k life, 45 chaos res, and practically 0 armor, evasion, or energy shield. And when I say practically 0, I mean it was a low enough amount that it was absolutely negligible with the 3.15 damage formulas. We did take Wind Dancer just to help keep us a little bit more alive, as this build was extremely squishy. It is full ZHP, very low quality of life. Would not suggest playing the 3.15 test character, but here are the results of that testing. With a tabula rasa, maximum of level 20 gems, although many were far below that, non-influenced rare items with only life, resistance, some attack speed, and a tiny bit of damage over time multiplier on our quiver. We were able to kill with this setup Elder, Shaper, and Uber Elder. We then were successfully able to complete tier 16 blighted maps using no offensive towers, meaning that we restricted ourselves to only using physical, chill, and empowering towers so that we could test the boss killing capabilities of our build. We then did a series of tier 10 Alch and Go speed mapping, which went well, all things considered. I think we only died a small handful of times in the tier 10s, if at all. And then we moved on to grinding out some tier 15 to 16 progressive style maps. It was a grind, it was slow and a little uncomfortable, but we were able to successfully clear and complete every map that we attempted. This is very promising for the much stronger 3.16 version of the build that we'll be playing. At this point, I wanted to limit test the build a little bit further, so I strapped on a Kitsugi, which ended up doing absolutely nothing for me, but also an Asenath's Gentle Touch and a replica Quillrain to assist with our clear. We then did multiple Alch and Go tier 15s and 16s, which went very well. We did have several deaths, but that's fine. This is a scuffed version of the build. We then ran a 100% Delirious tier 7 port map, which was a little bit too slow for my personal tastes. I tried running it again as an 80% Delirious and it went really, really well. So I think the build was just on that cusp of the damage threshold to be able to run 100% low tier maps very quickly. And that's, again, very promising for the 3.16 version of this build. Finally, I threw on a Headhunter and ran a tier 14 Canyon, 20% Delirious Nemesis 3 with full Scarab juicing. We were able to full clear this map in a respectable amount of time, though we did die 3 or 4 times, most of which was due to the actual Headhunter itself because of Shroudwalker. As an added bonus, we were able to walk out of that map with 2 raw exalts, which isn't bad for a test character. So let's check out this POB. You'll see here I have the configuration tab set up to show that I am not cheesing anything. I have no padding turned on. I am set up for Osiris DPS. We will easily maintain 15 withered stacks, and we can actually ramp them very quickly. We can consistently hit 5 overlapping toxic rain pods. We can also do 6 consistently if we have the additional projectiles available. We will always have 5 totems, or at least the majority of the time we will, and we're able to maintain maximum frenzy charges in maps with the use of Blood Rage, and on bosses with a 1-link frenzy setup. You'll also see here in the custom modifiers that I've added a few stats. These are to make up for masteries that don't currently work, and for the new flat armor on determination that is not on the skill gem in POB. Now let's head over to the passive tree section. And I want to take a moment here to point out that I do have leveling trees set up for this build, and this POB will be linked in the description section of the video. And I have gone over and made sure that I checked over the masteries in each one, but I may have missed some. I'll try to check over them again before I publish this, but just keep that in mind. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through every single notable and mastery that we pick up in the tree in chronological order of how you would pick them up while leveling. And I'll explain why we take them and what the mastery is for. So the first cluster we're going to look at is Growth and Decay. This is mostly a damage-oriented cluster, though it does have a bit of utility in the form of life regeneration. And the damage over time mastery that we'll be picking is 15% skill increased duration. This is just great for our build. Everybody knows Toxic Rain loves skill effect duration. The duration of ailments does absolutely nothing for us, but that's fine. For our next set of notable clusters, we will be starting with the Chaos Damage Mastery Cluster Wasting. Wasting itself is going to give us 10% to Chaos Damage over time multiplier, which is a great damage stat, and 17% to Chaos Resistance, which perfectly caps us with our current gear. For the Chaos Mastery itself, we're going to be taking plus 1% to Chaos Damage over time multiplier per 4% Chaos Resistance. Now, this is a node that you do want to revisit in PoE every so often to see where your character lands as you change your gear and level up. Because there is an alternative pick of plus 1 level to all Chaos skill gems, but lose 10% of life and energy shield when you use a Chaos skill. And this is not overly punishing to our build, but it is still punishing. So a lot of times it is in fact a damage increase, but I don't think it's necessarily worth it unless it is a large enough damage increase. So most of the time I am taking the safe route of 1% to Chaos Damage over time multiplier. Now for our next node is our first bow mastery. This is going to be Hunter's Gambit. This is mostly just a pure damage cluster, which is great, and it also gives us some increased skill effect duration. The bow mastery that we are going to be taking here, as it is our first bow mastery that we come across, will be to get more damage on board or online. Therefore, we will be taking 35% increased damage while you are wielding a bow and have a totem, which is us all of the time. I have set this up to be calculated in the custom configuration as I showed you earlier. And now we'll go take a look at our evasion mastery from Revenge of the Hunted, which the small nodes give life and evasion, and our large node gives evasion, maximum life, 10%. And an additional 10% to suppress spell damage while on full life. So earlier when I did say we have 31% spell suppression chance, we do have 41% on full life, but I don't want to falsely advertise what this build has. For our mastery here, we're going to be taking the evasion mastery 100% increased evasion rating from your body armor. This I have also added to the custom configuration and is a very, very strong node. Over here we have the charisma cluster. We won't be taking this at this point in time, so I'm going to come back to it later on when we talk about that setup. Moving along here, we come through here. A lot of these nodes have been greatly increased, greatly buffed, so investing in them is super worthwhile. It's a lot of damage, a lot of extra survivability, stun resistance, all great. And we'll get back to our clusters. Over here we have the herbalism cluster, which has 10% increased maximum life, 30% increased flask recovery rate. It's just an all-around great survival cluster. For our first life mastery, we're going to go ahead and just take the flat 50 to maximum life. This is just a great mastery, and it scales as we level. Our next cluster is going to be the Watchtowers cluster. This is going to give us increased totem damage. Attack skills have +1 to maximum number of Rain Ballista Totems. Effectively, this is just a +1 totem for us. Will bring us from 3 to 4, and 1% increased movement speed per summon totem, which is largely negligible. We are not going to be taking the totem masteries because I feel that they are exceptionally weak for the cost. So the next nodes that we're going to take a look at as we path on down to the bottom tree. Now you can stop and grab Deadly Draw if you like, but it's not mandatory to pick it up as soon as possible. If you need the damage, then grab it. And the bow mastery that we're going to take here is 8% increased movement speed while phasing and 20% chance to gain phasing for 4 seconds on kill. This is a very powerful mastery, and if you would like, you can take this as your first bow mastery. It's quite good, but you'll definitely want it once you get into mapping. For the cluster node itself, we have Deadly Draw, which is 30% increased damage over time with bow skills, and a damaging ailment modifier that means nothing to us. This is still a fairly good node despite what it looks like. We actually really like having increased damage at this point of the build. Up here, Art of the Gladiator is great damage, and we just pick up some more life over here with Bravery. And we have an extra floating point here to spend however you need with the level 95 build. Here we pick up Golem's Blood for the max life and regeneration. This is an excellent premium life node, and for the cluster bonus or mastery, we will take 10% increased maximum life and 10% reduced life recovery rate. Now, the downside of this recovery rate is countered by running Vitality and Stone Golem, If your regen is not enough to compensate for the reduced life recovery, I would suggest running something else instead. There is a great regenerate 2% of life per second while moving, which is arguably as strong or stronger than the 10% increased maximum life, depending on your life total as it is already. Down here, we have one of our most important damage clusters. Here we'll pick up Surveillance, which is 30% increased totem damage, and attacks used by totems have 8% increased attack speed. It also applies a stacking increased damage taken debuff to enemies near them. This goes up to 5 since we will have 5 totems, and is honestly more or less negligible only because we already stack so much Wither that monsters taking increased damage has been watered down. We'll take Panopticon for the 30% increased totem damage and our 5th and final additional totem. We will also be picking up Iron Reflexes, converting all of our evasion rating to armor. So dexterity provides no bonus to evasion rating. However, once we head up to the Scion starting area, we will be picking up Magebane, which again, dexterity provides no inherent bonus to evasion rating. We don't care. We already have Iron Reflexes, and plus 1% chance to suppress spell damage per 15 dexterity. Now, later in this character, you have the opportunity to start bringing on a very large amount of dexterity and scaling off that dexterity. With proper investment, you are able to hit near or over 100% spell suppression just from dexterity stacking and a couple of nodes on the tree. We will pick up Exceptional Performance, which is another 25% increased skill effect duration, as well as its 2 small 10% increased skill effect duration nodes. And for the duration mastery, we will pick 10% more skill effect duration. I do not think any further investment into duration masteries is actually positive. However, further investment into duration will always be positive. Over here, we pick up Constitution. This is for just a bunch of extra life. And we finally will take our life mastery of Vitality, has 100% increased mana reservation efficiency. This is huge, makes Vitality very cheap once you have Charisma. Once you're able to get a very large Thread of Hope, I consider this a fairly high priority upgrade for this build, so you're able to grab Potency of Will and its small nodes, as well as Harrier for some additional attack and movement speed. Just all around really great nodes for this character. And that finishes off our core build. We will then bring on Revelry, where the increased effect of non-curse auras on your enemies does nothing for us here. We do enjoy having a larger base mana pool. It is necessary for the reservations that we do. And the mana mastery will be taking Clarity, has 100% increased mana reservation efficiency. Once you have those, this makes Charisma very, very powerful. So you'll be taking Charisma for all of that reservation efficiency, and then you'll also be taking the Reservation Mastery of 15% increased mana reservation efficiency of skills. With these all combined, you'll be able to run Malevolence, Vitality, Clarity, and Determination at level 20 simultaneously. And this is a core part of this character going into maps, so it's very important that you do take those. Now, I mentioned earlier that there is flexibility in this tree, and I do want to show you some of it real fast. I'll lean more towards defensive options because I don't feel that there in this tree is a lot of room to drop defense for more damage without it starting to feel very bad. But there is plenty of room to drop a little bit of damage for a lot more defense. Down here we have Adamant, which is a really fantastic 3-point armor cluster. These small nodes give 12% increased armor each, which is great, but also guard skills have 20% increased cooldown recovery rate. Again here, with these you're able to get a pretty aggressive cooldown rate, especially with alt quality gems for, say, Immortal Call. And the final node, Adamant, 25% increased armor, removes bleeding and corrupted bloods when you use a guard skill. This is actually not very important to us. We have such high duration on our guard skills that we cannot reliably use them to remove bleeding and corrupted blood. However, this does give another 25% increased duration to guard skills, which is fantastic for Immortal Call if you're able to generate endurance charges. And for an armor mastery, you're able to pick up a number of viable options, but one that stands out to me is Determination has 25% increased mana reservation efficiency. Now, at this time, taking this does not allow you to run an additional aura off the bat, but with further investment into the character, you could bring something like Aspect of the Spider into the build, which would be very powerful. Opens up some other options as well, such as using Venomous Gloves for additional damage. We'll also look at Cloth and Chain. Cloth and Chain is pretty amazing, increased resists, evasion, and armor, but is also one of the few armor and evasion mastery nodes, and these are all just pretty awesome. Really what we're looking for here is 1 evasion per 1 armor on gloves. Now with our current setup, I don't believe we really get too much out of this. We see 700 armor, but with a properly crafted pair of apothecary gloves, you can easily pull out multiple thousands of armor from this node alone. Now we'll be moving on to the skill section of the build. I'm going to be going through this part fairly quickly. I think most of these setups are self-explanatory, and I'm not going to get into alternate qualities. I will explain the anomalous concentrated effect, but for more information on gems and alt qualities, there is a very detailed note section in my PoB. Read it. You don't have to read every word, but there's common questions and issues, common upgrade paths that you might want to take, common gear and gem swaps and flasks. It's all in here, so take a look and feel free to approach me and ask any questions that you might have. Now back to our skill setups. This is our 6th link for Toxic Rain, self-explanatory or stacking as much damage as we can. Now for the concentrated effect, testing has shown that if you have 0% increased area of effect anywhere on your Toxic Rain and run anomalous concentrated effect, you hit an area of effect breakpoint that gives you a very consistent up to 6 projectiles hit per attack. You will not be able to get more than 6. I've never seen more than 6, but you can very consistently get 6, so it makes that extra projectile very worthwhile. Moving on, this is our entry-level mapping setup. At this point, you have at least a 5, if not a 6 link on your Quill Rain, and likely running maybe a Tabula or a 5 link rare chest. You'll be running Caustic Arrow with Arrow Nova and Pierce, and this is going to allow Caustic Arrow to hit as many things as possible. Caustic Arrow is a great curse applicator because it explodes on hit, and it will explode for each pierce that it makes, and that explosion will curse everything that it hits. So at this point in the game, we do not have access to any further curse automation, so we rely on a self-used Caustic Arrow to get our curses out. You cannot use Mirage Archer to cast your curses or hex touch your curses. It does not function on Mirage Archer, only your self-casts. We have our Utilibane set up, which is probably how you'll be leveling most of the time. The reasoning here is that Bane is a 3 link to place 2 curses at the same time, where Caustic Arrow doesn't start to feel good as a curse applicator until you can have at least Pierce and or Arrow Nova with both of your curses. If you really like Bane and you want to push it further, this is the setup that I recommend. Just scaling AoE, basically. And you could even drop Arcane Surge at this point because we don't need the mana. Here we have our pure DPS Caustic Arrow setup. This is for further in the end game. It's maximizing damage when you have another place to put your curses or automate your curses. This is an optional link for using Maloney's mechanism. I don't recommend it, but if you really love it, go right ahead. Our cast and damage taken setup with Steel Skin. I have these both at 20 right now. This is definitely flexible. I would suggest that you adjust this to your personal and character preferences. I also have the summon Stone Golem attached to cast when damage taken. Stone Golems are having their defensiveness buffed, but I don't know how good it's going to be yet, so this is just a kind of safety. We have Blood Rage in our helmet as well, but we ensure that it is not linked to cast when damage taken, because if it is, then we're not able to self-cast it at the start of the map, and we lose out on all that extra juice on bosses and mapping until we take enough damage to get our Blood Rage up. It's really just not worth it. And because of all of our skill effect duration, we end up having like a 25-second Blood Rage, so you barely need to even use it to keep it up 100% of the time on bosses anyway. In our boots, I have our Flame Dash. You can use any movement skill that you want. I go over this fairly extensively in the note section, why you would want to use a few different skill gems. And then we have our multiple totems, Spell Totem Wither. Because multiple totems is going to give its supported totem +2 to maximum, that means when you use your Wither totem, you'll drop 2 and they will count towards their own cap and not affect the totems that are in your Toxic Rain Ballista. Just don't spam them and you'll be fine. These will get your Wither stacked on the boss very, very quickly. And once you've reached your cap and you have a full stack of Occultist Wither, which lasts 15 seconds, you'll be golden. So this is all about getting our Wither stacks up on bosses online as quick as we can. Down here, this is a more mapping oriented setup. It's also optional. I like to use a setup like this on very, very juiced maps, high delirium with double beyond or strong boxes. This also does eat corpses on the ground. However, it does not destroy them on death. They have to be already dead on the ground. For example, you cannot use this to stop a porcupine from hitting you with its quills when it dies. However, it can be used on a strong box, which has detonate dead on it, to stop all of the bodies from being detonated, and can be a safety mechanism. That's all nice, but the primary utility here is that you can stack a lot of area of effect on it and crowd control huge amounts of mobs on top of each other, which makes them prime targets for explosion chaining, which is how we scale our AoE. You can also finally choose between Intensify and Withering Touch. Withering Touch will get a fair amount of stacks of Wither up on all of the targets. It won't cap them out, but just a couple of stacks on trash mobs is usually more than enough to get them dead very quickly. So this is pretty nice, again, especially on super juiced like Delirium maps. I will say for Void Sphere, I do highly suggest you run Anomalous. This will put you at, I believe, a 7-second cooldown and like a 12-second uptime, which means you have 100% uptime, and you get to use your skill more often. For your gloves, these are our aura setups: Malevolence, Vitality, Clarity, and Determination. If for whatever reason you don't have enough mana to run all of them, you can run a lower level Vitality and Clarity, just to make sure that you don't drop too low and stop sustaining your life or mana against your Blood Rage. Okay, so on to our gear. This is a pretty easy one, as you can see. So Quill Rain, it's not our end-all, be-all, best in slot, but for all practicality, it's good enough for most of all of the content in the game with this build. Just go for it. It's a fantastic bow, feels awesome. If you love the build, you can craft yourself a GG build or GG bow later. For our rare items, you'll see a trend here. We really only go for life, resists, damage over time, and attack speed where we can. None of our gear is influenced, and most of it is extraordinarily bad. We'll go over it real quick. Here's our quiver. Starkania's is a very good helmet. I suggest if you are able to get the enchant for Toxic Rain to go for +1 projectile. having access to just a flat 6 projectiles and no further is really good for high consistency on bosses. However, we do have access to scale a lot more projectiles if we so choose. They just aren't good for single target. Our body armor, just a bit of evasion, life and resists. Gloves have attack speed, implicit damage over time, life and resists. This is actually a hybrid life on these gloves. So life and hybrid life. Our boots, which are a small amount of life and more resists. An amulet, which is filling in some stats for us, life, and you guessed it, some resists. Our 2-stone ring, life and resists. Our prismatic ring, attack speed and life, because we are resist capped. And a dinky leather belt to fill in some more life and stats that we need. One of the first upgrades that I will recommend for this build is a Cyclopean Coil. Whether you can self-farm this from Elder or you pick one up off of the marketplace for cheap, this, if your stats are set up the way that mine are, where dexterity is higher than intelligence, is higher than strength, this is going to make you immune to freeze and shock, which is really nice. Give you a decent amount of life, 14% or 15% with a perfect roll increased attributes, and 1% increased damage per 5 of your lowest attribute, which you can see is actually about 5 to 6% damage, depending on where your attributes are at. These are also a really, really good option for loading into your crucible and getting some Scourge mods on. But like I said, we're not going to get into that because I'm not 100% sure what they are going to be or if they're going to be good at all on a unique belt like this. For our flasks, we're going with whatever life flask setup that you prefer. I like staunching, and with the new flasks, I think Panicked is looking pretty good. They count on low life past or under 50% now. So with the life flask buffs that we're getting in 3.16, I wanted to run a Panicked Eternal Life Flask. I'm going with staunching to keep myself protected from bleeding and corrupted blood. The Panicked effect is really interesting with the new flasks because the new flasks have, I believe it's double the recovery rate. So they are a lot stronger than they used to be. And now, since 3.14, low life is 50%. So anytime you dip under 50%, you tap your life flask, you're back to full. It's awesome. Here we have a Jade Flask. This is for defense. This is the most armor we can get on a single flask at this stage. Silver Flask for Onslaught, and we have attack speed on here. Quicksilver with increased movement speed, and Alchemists. Again, you can use, these are suggestions. You can use any flask setup you like. That's kind of the point of this. And I like to throw on a Silver Flask. That extra damage is actually really nice, and so is the Consecrated Ground. Here we have one of our highest priority upgrades. This is a boss drop, and it's the only boss drop I'm including in the core item set. And the reason that I think it's fine is that Thread of Hope can drop off of any level Cyrus, which means that you can farm Cyrus 0 until one drops if you so choose. That to me means that you can do this on an extreme budget, fairly low level character if you really wanted to. For our rare jewels, this is kind of an idea of what you'll be going towards, but with 3.16, they've introduced new affixes for damage over time multiplier. The chaos damage over time multiplier, I believe, is doubled. I think there might be another, maybe a generic damage over time multiplier stat as well. Either way, the new jewels are insane. They're very valuable. You can see that this is already 5% of my damage. That tells me with the new, more potent gems or jewels that we will likely be dropping damage wherever we can to invest into jewel sockets to regain a higher amount of damage from our jewels. This is easier said than done because there is a point where you don't want to lose masteries that are core to your build. Finally, before we end this video, I want to show you we still have this set to minimum. And so these are our effective hit pools and our maximum hit taken. These are nothing to really brag about, but they're pretty good. And 41,000 on your physical is a whole lot better than the, I believe, like 6,000, maybe 8,000 that we had on the 3.15 test character. And our biggest issue was physical damage. No surprise there. So with a much, much higher physical health pool, I really do believe that this character is going to feel almost like tanky compared to the 3.15 versions. And that's going to wrap it up for us here. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, whether or not you play the build guide. If you do, let me know how you like it. Feel free to reach out to me here via comments on Discord or on Twitch where I stream. Those are all linked below. I will take a quick moment to address, I do have this in the notes, but I want to point it out. If you are starting as this build, most of the most important gems for this build are not quest rewards on a witch. So unless you have a friend that is willing to trade gems with you, or you're part of a community that does gem trading, or you can always try to buy it off the market, you probably have better luck maybe on TFT. Either way, if you're not going to do any of that, you will have to pick some other witch build and level with that at least until Act 3, where you can start to buy your bow gems from Siosa. Finally, Toxic Rain is heavily dependent on attack speed for damage, and Ballista Totem support has a 50% less attack speed modifier on it. What this means is that if you plug in Toxic Rain and Ballista support, when you can first equip them at level 12, they are so slow without Quill Rain that your damage is actually pathetic. I've given some advice for dealing with this in my notes here, but if at all possible, buy yourself the best bow you can find. Really what you're looking for is as much attack speed as possible, and if you can get your hands on a Quill Rain early, go for it. I would personally be willing to empty out probably my entire stash on day 1 to get an early Quill Rain. Anyway, thank you guys again. I really appreciate it. Let me know if you like the build in the comments below. Come check me out on Twitch. I'm going to be streaming Scourge quite a bit. And have a great day.